Hello and welcome to Drop or Not 2010, where I'm going through and chronicling my journey through the year 2010 in anime. I'm watching every single show and hopefully finding what's the good and what's the not so good. Starting off, we have Arakawa Under the Bridge. This is a interesting show. It's produced by Studio Shaft, so it's got plenty of the typical Shaftisms. And the main premise of it is that this character, Ko Ichinomiya, gets caught up with this girl who calls herself a Venusian or an alien, Nino, and ends up living under the bridge in this sort of small, off-the-grid community of wackos. And Ko himself, though he wouldn't admit it, is also somewhat a wacko because his family motto that he's been raised with and that he abides to quite strongly is never be indebted to anyone. And what ends up happening is and this is all in the first episode, he gets indebted to Nino, and he asks her what he can possibly do to repay that debt because he has to. He doesn't want to be, indebted, so he has to pay him back. And she says, okay, be my lover. I want to know what that means. And he's like, welp, guess I'm here. And that's like the setup, and then it sort of just builds on that with lots of absurd jokes because the cast of characters is quite broad from this buff like Yakuza type guy who goes by Sister and wears a nun's outfit and runs the church, to the sadistic girl who runs the farm named Maria. The village chief is a guy dressed up as a kappa. There's a guy called Hoshi Star, who just has a star on his head. He's also like a big point of conflict because he's in love with Nino. So he's very envious of their relationship, to put it simply. The show's pretty fun. The premise itself lends itself well to lots of, comical interactions. But what I think is interesting about the show is that it doesn't really lean in on the comedy as much as you might expect. A lot of times in comedy anime, they do this thing where they sort of lean into a little bit of saccharine or heartfeltness. I'm thinking of a show like Asobi Asobase, for example, is one that I remember as doing this a decent amount. Or even Joshikose no Murasake, Zaki, or wa Murasake, I can't remember. Both of them will lean into the heartfelt moments. The latter one does it much more seriously at times. But generally, on an episode-to-episode basis, there will be times where they lean into a heartfelt moment, and you kind of start to feel it a little bit, and then they pull back for a joke, like pull the rug out from under you. Not to say that usually the heartfeltness is, completely a joke, but like it takes a step back. It like chuckles about it. It doesn't, keep taking itself seriously. Arakawa Under the Bridge doesn't do that. There's a lot of times where it's leaning into a heartfelt moment that I was expecting it to pull back and, haha, the joke time. But no, most of the time it just sits on it and lets the scene end. And that's really nice. I enjoyed that element of it a lot. Excuse me. In fact, that the way it handles that is really well done. And that's one of my favorite parts of it, is when it is actually being more serious despite its rather goofy premise. However, when it comes to the point of comedy, it wasn't a really, a strong hitter. I would get maybe a couple chuckles in an episode, but considering the fact that the episode is mainly supposed to make you laugh, that's not a very good ratio. However, I think what makes it work is the fact that the characters are just fun to watch. The show is just at a baseline entertaining. The production is pretty strong, and because of the Shaft-isms, as it were, I realize now more and more, because I know that a lot of their productions are not necessarily super high budget, or highly staffed, I should say. They're not working with a whole lot of resources, and yet they still manage to make shows that look pretty good. And it's through this variety of various different editing techniques, lots of fast cuts, back and forth, ways that they find to reuse footage and such, that they can create a show that visually is fairly fast-paced and engaging without necessarily having to, constantly be at 100% in the literal animation department. And I think that type of format, that type of editing style, works really well for these specific type of kind of mundane comedy series. It gives it this consistent, like, visually engaging nature because of, the joke is that it is kind of mundane. Even with these characters that are absurd, the humor is from the fact that these absurd characters are just kind of chilling. That element of it I liked a lot. The characters are definitely likable. I think the point of critique I would have for it is the fact that they are somewhat lacking in nuance, and this causes it to be when they lean in on the more heartfelt characters, especially for the characters that are not specifically Riku, the main guy, and Nino. When they try and do it with characters outside of them, it's a little harder to vibe with because the characters are so caricatured. They're very much this, like, one personality type embodied, or not even personality type, but rather like idea of, like, they are X, like the sadist, or the crazy village chief who wears a kappa suit. Like, half of the things, most of the jokes about him are just that he is in a kappa suit, but he says he's a kappa, and the main guy always points out that it's a suit, whereas the kappa guy just ignores him and keeps talking like he is a kappa. Like, that's the bulk of their interactions, stuff like that, where it's very straightforward, and I would have liked a little bit more creativity with how their interactions unfold, because I don't feel like my expectations were ever really subverted, outside of the fact that when it leans into the heartfelt moments, it usually doesn't turn it into a joke, which kind of subverts my expectations, because from watching so many comedy anime, I've come to expect the opposite. I really think that Arakawa Under the Bridge is a series that is, at its baseline, just fine. It's just entertaining. The characters are nice to watch interact. The visuals are solid and aesthetically pleasing. It just hits that, like, perfect, like, I can watch this. I can watch this. And then on top of that, there are those moments where it really works. I can't think of a single moment that I thought was, like, exceptionally funny. There aren't really any moments that I can recall that really had me laughing, but there are moments that it really emotionally, like, got me. And this is specifically the interactions between Riku and Nino, the main guy and the main girl. Their dynamic is really strong, and definitely the best part of the show by far. They are the most interesting characters. Nino, for one, has this sort of straightforwardness of being, she's kind of out of it, but there's a lot of implications that there's something to her past that she's not revealing, and that gives everything a bit more nuance to it. She's perceptive at the right moments, and the main guy, even though the premise behind the way he his like mindset that causes him to be swept up in this is very much a goofy one and an unbelievable one, it does feel like an abstraction of something that is more realistic, because a lot of it, I mean, I don't want to spoil it because I think the way that things are revealed is rather interesting, but it does go into a lot of stuff with how his relationship with his father affected him emotionally and affected his development. And he becomes more emotionally open as he spends time with this tight-knit community. And specifically, it's rather funny. I think this is one of the more funny things it does, is seeing as time goes on, you sort of see his standards change. Because at the beginning it's very much, all of you people are crazy. This is whack. This is absurd. This is stupid. But towards the end of the series, he's gotten a lot more accepting of things that he wouldn't have realized were crazy. There's specifically a scene in like episode 11, I think, where he's like, one of the characters asks, "What is common sense?" And he's like, "Huh." And it's really funny. It works really well, as you see like his certain weirder personality traits start coming out more, and in ways he starts being more overt with elements of his affection for Nino, and their dynamic is really cute. And I think if you just watch the OP, because the OP in itself is fantastic, I didn't skip it a single time. It's like the visuals look gorgeous, and the song is done by the lead vocalist for the band Sotaisei Ridan, which is one of my favorite bands. Has such a warm, comfy atmosphere, and the way that it captures Nino and Riku's dynamic is like totally encapsulates the appeal of their like the more heartfelt moments between them. In that OP, all the scenes they share together really effectively, just like in a small little bottle, captures what I like about their relationship and why I find it so appealing. It's just really, really cute, and I that's the thing that I think will stick with me, like in my memory. I can't say that I'll really likely remember any of the jokes per se, but the cast is, pretty striking and memorable, and a lot of the moments they have, there are definitely a lot of moments that they have together that are, really charming, and I liked it. It was a good show. Definitely not as good as I wanted it to be. Like, I feel like I've said a billion times now. It didn't make me laugh very much. I would have definitely liked it a lot more if it had made me laugh more. But on a whole, I did enjoy it. Iron Man. Alright, so there's an Iron Man anime. Neat. This one is kind of just like, I don't know what to make of it. It's interesting because it has certain sensibilities that I would associate with more Western works, as being it's Iron Man, but the way that it's interpreted, I feel like kind of sucks out a lot of what I remember being the appeal. Tony Stark is not, he's not very charismatic. He's kind of just like, I don't know how to put it. Like he's more straightforward, I guess, is how they present him. But he lacks that, strong, striking charisma that Tony Stark has come to embody, and what has been a big part of his appeal is, he's very, excessively self-confident, and like doesn't care so much about what other people think, because he's gonna make it work on his own, in spite of that. And that trait was kind of lacking in what I watched of the first episode. Pair that with the character designs, which are like really, I would say, almost excessively detailed, and not necessarily for their benefit. They look kind of off, and they certainly don't animate super well. I mean, it's not bad by any means, but definitely not to my taste. The way they're shaded and stuff is just kind of creepy almost, and so aesthetically I'm not super into it. It lacks the personality that I would want, and the focus on like this like first half of this episode that I watched was basically just explaining why Iron Man can be in Japan, and it's like I don't really care. I don't feel like that is something that needs like a whole lot of explanation to, get across. He's spending a lot of time like, oh, this is, the Japanese way, or this is, what Japan is like. Part of it was kind of just like praising Japan. And I was like, man, this is just just kind of boring. Not really into it. Okay, Scan to Go is a dumb kids show with a bad dub. Oh, I don't want to watch it. Yeah, it's just kind of ugly, and the dub is I don't want to listen to those voices, and I couldn't find a sub version anywhere. And it seems to be about like racing, and I hate racing, like car racing. It's so not very interesting to me. I've never really been too into racing, and I know there are ways to present it in an interesting fashion. That's true with literally anything, but if you're presenting it in a way that's supposed to appeal to kids that are into cars, that's fine and dandy, but that doesn't appeal to me at all, and that's the vibe I got from this. Kiss X Sis. I'm all for some degeneracy, but like I want it to be entertaining to me. There's a lot of these edgy shows that it's just like, why would I watch this instead of, something that's a little more direct with it, with my needs. And I'm not really into any of these characters. They're kind of annoying. And to be honest, like, they're not even that cute. They're like kind of cute, but this isn't even like my number one in like, oh, I love these character designs so much, and their voices and the way they like interact. So it's not, I wouldn't even necessarily be like super motivated to watch this because of that. Because I feel like if you are gonna watch a show like this, it needs to literally be your favorite thing ever from that standpoint. And this is not. All right, so once again, I'm gonna be rambling about a show I dropped that I watched a bunch of shows and then I either couldn't or didn't feel like recording. So now my memory has faded a little bit, which is rather unfortunate. But anyways, this anime that I'm talking about in this segment is Heroman. This is a series, I believe, conceptualized by Stan Lee. He's credited as the original creator, so I don't know if he was necessarily super involved beyond the like concept. But yeah, and on a base level, there are elements of it that I was pretty into. I like the character designs in particular quite a bit, and I think it's specifically because they have somewhat of a Western influence that makes it a little more interesting. However, I finished the whole first episode, and I just cannot say that I was particularly interested in seeing the show to its completion, especially since it's like 26 episodes long. The characters, and none of the cast really is especially striking to me or super entertaining, and the way things are presented, it's kind of hard to describe, but it like feels very Western, like comic booky, which makes sense if it's Stan Lee. In the way that things are presented very straightforwardly almost, or directly. But the thing is, I just don't really, I feel like the way that the different like cultural ideas mix doesn't gel very well. And this is, I feel like I'm saying this like crazy, but it just didn't really resonate with me. And I was just sort of going through the episode like it's perfectly finely constructed episode. There wasn't anything that I really thought was super off-putting, but it lacked that little special something to get me, to have me really caring. Hime, Chen, Otogi, Chikku, Idol, Lilpri. I think that's how it's pronounced. I like the voice actors a lot. The voice actors give very cute performances for these girls. But the show itself is really boring and slow, so I did not want to watch it. Ladies versus Butlers, first and foremost, is one in this line of shows that I will be talking about coming up. I guess 2010 was really the year of the whole, like guy accidentally gropes girl or slash like accidentally sees her panties meme, because I've seen so many shows that pull that exact cue. This show is one of them. However, Ladies vs. Butlers is almost absurd enough to be entertaining. I would say the production is pretty strong overall. The girls are quite cute, and they also appeal to a variety of different tastes with a wide range of body types. And I feel like it definitely knows exactly how stupid it's being, and that's kind of the point, like, as the events continually escalate. But as I was watching, I was just like, it's the exact type of humor that you expect when I describe, like, guy accidentally sees panties or accidentally gropes girl. Like, that is the humor. That is the joke. Like, he falls on and then he gropes the girl, and also the joke is kind of like he like sits on her for like a solid like 30 seconds, and then antics ensue, and I don't find that funny, and it's like I don't really watch the like fan servicey shows that are not funny, because if it's hot, then like there are other things I could turn to that would give me the same appeal with less time investment or like less waiting for what I want. So like it's got to be funny. Like I'm thinking of Ishizoku reviewers from this season, or at least this season as I'm recording. I love that show. It is very fan servicey. I mean, that's literally the whole point. But the show's writing is good. It's funny and genuinely interesting. So it works. But it's like you can't just have the one thing. Like you still have to have a well-written show. And Ladies versus Butlers is sorely lacking in that department. Omamori Himari pulls exactly the thing I was talking about with Ladies versus Butlers. Literally the opening like scene. That's what happens. So that was not fun. I was not into it. And the main girl, because I did not make it very far into this episode, so the girl that I've really only seen much of at all, is like the most insufferable tsundere archetype. I don't hate all tsunderes, but she is like all of the traits that I find insufferable. She's just like, she's kind of an asshole, and it's like, this isn't cute. She's just a jerk, and I don't like her. And then like it's gonna turn into a broader harem, but I don't want to see that. So that's my reasoning. I sure hope these me trying to remember something of value to say about a show I dropped like a week ago. I hope this is turning out okay. Hyakka Ryouran Samurai Girls is okay yet again. Pulls a whole accidentally mieta. I saw. So that's obnoxious. The big issue with this, the reason that I like had no desire at all to watch it, is really the aesthetic. You should see it if I remember to put something on screen. But the like, it's like trying to be ambitious. It's got this like very like thick, bold line art. And it's, I don't know how to describe it. It's like very like painted almost effect on the whole thing, like a visual filter. And it feels like they had something that they were trying to do, but it just looks bad. Like, in execution, it just looks like really gross. Even the background art, like, it looks like they took like real pictures or 3D models, and then did that whole cartoonify feature where it like basically boldens the lines and flattens the colors, and it just looks gross. Like, everything just looks really yucky, and it's like, no, thank you. I do not want to keep my eyes open while I'm watching this show. All right, so I actually finished an anime finally. How about that? That's crazy. This show is Otome Youkai Zakuro. It's a show set right around the period, I think it's the Meiji period, basically where Western influence is really starting to make its way into Japan. And so, but with this show specifically, the premise is based around the fact that this world is one where spirits are real, and that they are coming more and more to the forefront of society, essentially. And the show follows the Ministry of Spirit Affairs, which is sort of a union of a couple different individuals from the army and this group of half-spirit girls. They're both like half-human, half-fox spirit. And they come together and essentially are solving a variety of cases pertaining to spirits and their effect. And the focus is very much on the element. It's an interesting type of series because one of the things I like about it is the way that it handles multiple different thematic areas. So on the one side, there's the clear sort of racial allegory between because spirits are sort of discriminated against and looked down on and feared, even though more often than not they do not merit that fear. Like, there's a particular episode where they are tasked with dealing with this spirit that is appearing and frightening people at this new building that's being built. And what it turns out is that this spirit is totally harmless, and in fact it's actually really small. It's just projecting something that seems bigger and scarier because this construction project ended up destroying the shrine in which it lived. I guess you could even interpret that as like a metaphor for gentrification if you really wanted to read into it. But yeah, so there's this whole angle of essentially race, because they are basically a different race. But then there's also the angle of culture. There's a big element of them sort of needing to come to an understanding, because the broader Japan and the spirits have sort of coexisted for a long time, and it is sort of with the introduction of westernization that is pushing the spirits out of hiding. In fact, there's one moment particularly where they reference now all the streets are lit with lamps, are the places that we used to live in and hide in, and the corners of the world are being torn away from us. Which also, the episode I was referencing before, that particular spirit wants to be in the darkness, and so having constant lights everywhere is making that spirit's life rather difficult. So, and even the main character, or one of the main characters, Zakuro, is very, very opposed to anything Western from the start of the series, to trying anything Western. A big, sort of overarching thing is her finally trying milk, because she refuses to try it for so long because it's gross and Western and such and such. So those two elements I like, and I enjoy how they're handled. And even the whole, it's a little cheesy, but the setup basically gives you a bunch of ships, and it's not a harem. It's not a who's gonna end up with who. There's no question. You know what the pairings are literally from episode 1. And personally, I like that. I like being able to just enjoy watching relationships develop with no need for the additional concern of anything outside of that being introduced. I mean, the setup is a little, it's a little funny that they're perfectly paired into these, relationships from the outset of the show. But I dig it. I like it, and all the dynamics of the characters are really appealing and very cute. I don't know if it's adapting a shoujo manga or not, but it feels that way. The way things are presented. In fact, it reminds me in a lot of ways of the show Meiji Tokyo Renka, which came out in 2018, and that I enjoyed a lot. However, I think that show is more well handled from like a overall perspective, because the problem with Zakuro, as much as I enjoy it, as much as I like it, as cute as I find all the character dynamics and the romantic tinges, and even the ways that like there are ways that the characters connect with each other that is really effectively handled. All the characters have a measure of sort of baggage or personality traits or flaws that play off of each other really well, impressively well. And there's way more subtleties than I would expect going into a show like this. I went into it and I had absolutely no expectations. And like in episode 4, there's this girl who so this is a slight spoiler. So if you're interested, maybe skip ahead a little bit. But I don't think it's that big a deal. Basically, it's revealing because all of the half spirits have different powers, and so it's revealing the power of this one girl, Suzuki Hotaru. And her power essentially is she's an empath. She by touching or being close to something with like strong emotional energy, she can sort of understand what the feelings are, and in some cases even get a sort of vague grasp on events and details and things. It's not very solid. It's not the same as mind reading, in that like the exact things. It's more emotional. Obviously, that's what her power is. It's an emotional power. And that specifically lends itself well to a lot of really strong moments because the guy that she's paired with is a sort of stone-faced kind of dude where he's a quiet type. Like he's caring, but he doesn't really express his feelings outwardly. And so this leads to a lot of really, really sweet moments where they embrace and she can understand his feelings, because he's not very good at expressing them outside of that. Like her power literally is the perfect, complement to their dynamic. Or even, as I was getting at before I got off track, in episode 4, there's a moment with this, we are introduced to this little girl that doesn't have a mom. She's sort of has this adoptive mom that we meet. She's staying with, that's a human, which is a surprise to them, but like a nice surprise because as the series goes on, you sort of see people becoming more accepting of spirits. It's like this really subtle but nice arc. And the girl's mom is missing, and Suzuki Hotaru, she touches, I can't remember if she touches the girl or she touches a weapon or something, but anyway, she discovers that the girl's mother is dead, and the girl says to her like, I'm being good like for my mother, and Suzuki Hotaru basically assures her, oh, your mother, yeah, will come back if you're a good girl, trying to be nice. However, later on in the series, there's an event that basically sparks the little girl's memory, and she remembers the events. However, Suzuki Hotaru is not aware of this, and so she goes when they're parting, and it's sort of like an emotional parting. Suzuki Hotaru feels like the implication of the scene is that she feels like she needs to, tell her that like her mother is really, really dead, because it's wrong of her to lie about that when she knows the truth. And so she goes in and hugs the girl because like this is an emotional like connection, and there's a moment of realization when she recognizes that the girl knows that her mother is dead, and like she instead says, I can't remember the exact line. I wish I had written it down. But it was a really powerful moment because of the way that the emotionality, like the tinges of like what you're expecting her to do and then how it shifts, and it's done so subtly. It doesn't have to explain it to you. It doesn't have to, it's just this little moment of connection. And I love stuff like that. I love stuff like that. But then tragically, the last like 4 or 5 episodes of this show, basically as the show goes on, it gets more and more focused on this arc pertaining to Zakuro's backstory and where Zakuro came from. And I'll avoid spoilers since I do still recommend the show overall. I think it's worth watching personally. And it sort of tries to breach an even heavier dramatic territory. Like this sort of more action drama rather than like interpersonal, like a romantic drama kind of thing, romantic societal drama. In this case, it's much more action focused, but it's just kind of clumsy. There's a lot of parts that don't really feel like they were forced to fit together, even though they don't really work. A lot of characters just sort of standing around or ending up in the right place because they needed to be in that location. Like it felt like they had like a set like idea of certain things they wanted, like a certain type of redemption arc and a certain type of emotional moment here and here and here, but that the way that they connect just doesn't really make sense, and that really hurts the investment. And yet still, the characters are strong enough that I was emotionally invested. I think a big part of the reason is that a bulk of that arc, one of the best characters, Zakuro, is kind of absent. And it's focusing a lot more on characters that are not the main characters, which is like the strength of the show was in the interaction of our main, like the interactions of our main protagonists and how they like understand and grapple with the world around them. And this one is more focused on this specific like setting and backstory and everything that it's been sort of building up to, and it just kind of lost me. It really did. And that it's sad because I feel like I would have genuinely loved this show. As it stands, I'm giving it like a 6.5. I'd say it's like a strong 6. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. But like I was like, there were moments where I was like, this is like an 8 out of 10 show. Like if it had kept its trajectory, it could have been really great. There's moments in the soundtrack that are fantastic. The visuals, sometimes they falter, but overall, I think the visuals are fairly well done, especially in the first half. Like it's funny, as it becomes more action focused, I felt like the production suffered because there are action moments in the beginning, but they're more poetic. Specifically, the first episode was the moment that really grabbed me, because the way the action sequence is presented is Zakuro pulls out this branch and it transforms into a sword, and it's like this, like they change the backgrounds to be like this special color as she's facing this spirit. And her fellow spirit friends are doing this chant that basically is to support her, this song, and it feels otherworldly, which is exactly how it should feel, right? And it works so well, and it looks fantastic. And that was the reason I was like so caught off guard by such a fantastic first episode. Whereas the action moments in the latter half of the show, it's just like, oh, yep, they're fighting. So stuff like that is kind of sad because I feel like it could have been a fantastic show, but it's still good. It made me emotional in the end. Like I wasn't really super into it for like the conclusion itself. But even then, characters that they introduced in the conclusion, I did grow emotionally attached to. So it's like, even in the moments that I'm like, yeah, I wasn't really into this, it wasn't that good, there's still elements of it that really, like, that I felt. And that's why I respect it a lot as a show. So, yeah, that's Zakuro. It's a neat one. Alright, I'm just gonna try and blaze through a bunch of these drop shows because, honestly, occasionally there's a show, you watch and you drop and you're like, oh, I have something interesting to say, but a lot of these are kind of, they fall into the bland character, and there's a lot of stuff I'm getting close to finishing that I have a lot more to say about, so I want to spend my time more wisely. So first up, Fortune Arterial Akai Yakusoku. This is one of those things that is like, it's a very, very obvious visual novel adaptation, and it has all the trappings of such. There's just a certain style of presentation, the way things are directed and presented, and the way characters are introduced, and the way dialogue is written. It's very distinct. And to be honest, I don't really like this style of visual novels that much. I've tried some occasionally, and I definitely want to give them a more fair shake. But especially when translated into animation, I feel like a lot of the time they just lack the strong character writing. Especially because I think of a series like Clannad, which has a lot of the similar trappings of these other series that I don't like. But Clannad just has really strong character writing. The characters are more nuanced than I get from most other things I find similar. And yeah, so production is kind of plain, not a big... Don't dislike the character designs and the general aesthetic, but am not like especially fond of it either. Soundtrack is mid. Characters are just really kind of not doing a whole lot for me, so I wasn't very invested. Following that, Digimon Xros Wars. I don't know how to pronounce that. It is first off only available dubbed, so that's already a point of issue. It's a really ugly, straightforward kids show. Like there's good kids shows out there, but this one is just it's doing its thing. I think even as a child, I don't think I would have enjoyed this very much. It was very unappealing. Ichiban Ushiro no Daimaou. This is about a guy who goes to Magic Academy, and then they're doing this thing where it's predicting what they'll be in their future, divining, and he gets Demon King, and then he has to deal with all of the struggles that come with that, and it's like harem-ness. It's harem from 2010. That's my descriptor. There's lots of like fan service and stuff off the bat. I do not like the characters. The girls are very annoying. So that's kind of off-putting when the girls I'm supposed to find cute and be into, I dislike. So yeah. Mayoi Neko Overrun. Annoying tsundere. 2010s harem. Like, I think this just not really my thing. These I hate to use the word, but trashy harems. Like, I'm not into it. And like, I like moe stuff, but harems have never really vibed with me that much. There's a couple that I do like, but for the most part, I find the setup doesn't engage me. It doesn't make me excited to see what comes next. It generally leaves me more annoyed because I'm like, oh, well, I know what the drama's gonna be. He's gonna have to pick, and I don't like that. I prefer when it's a more clearly established relationship from the outset, or when it at least is like leaning in on the drama of these conflicted relationship dynamics. Like, not a harem, but like Nagi no Asakara, like, sets up conflicted relationship dynamics and then it explores them like in a dramatic sense. That's something I'm into. But when it's more lighthearted with this twinge of dramaticism, I tend not to vibe with it much. Yosuga no Sora is yet another visual novel adaptation. In fact, this one's possibly the most visual novel-y of them all, since it does something that a couple shows do, but it's relatively rare from what I know, where it's split up into different blocks of episodes which each adapt a different girl's route. And while to a degree it seems somewhat intentional, the presentation is really, how to describe it, cold, dry, lifeless. It lacks any like energy. Like, it feels flaccid. And that's like, I want something like, if you're gonna go for something like that, I need more sense of atmosphere, which it's not really giving me either. So it didn't really compel me to keep watching. Shinrei Tantei Yakumo. This is one of the shows where it's like the super perceptive guy who can, see spirits and such, and he's solving the mysteries. I watched the first episode, was not too into it. Visually, it's not especially compelling, and the mystery itself, I thought was handled pretty poorly. I thought it was pretty dumb. The villain, or at least the villain of this episode, was pretty lame. Just the general way that the mystery was executed and delivered upon, I thought, was not very believable and kind of retarded. And if that's the first episode of a mystery, like a serial mystery type show, then I feel like I have a grasp on what it's gonna be like. So I wasn't feeling it. Giant Killing had a real English voice actor in it. That was cool. And there's a scene in the beginning of the episode where it's someone that's native language is English, which was neat, even though they're not exactly a stellar voice actor. So it's kind of funny. Other than that, the show is just really visually unappealing to me. I don't like the general color design. The character designs are really, really unattractive. It kind of reminds me of Piano no Mori, just the way the characters are designed. They've also got this weird like line shading thing, which I think looks really bad when you try and do that in animation, like especially like conventional animation, like where it's stylized but within a certain set of confines. It looks really awkward and weird and does not work. Then also lots of dated bad CG, and like the scene of them playing soccer just looked ugly. I was like, yeah, no thank you. I don't want to look at that kind of sports. Kacho no Koi. Badly animated, not very funny, pretty boy gayness. There you go. That's the OVA. It's like the joke is gay. Am I right, guys? Gay. Also the whole appeal, gay. Am I right, guys? No thanks. Pass. Koi Suru Boukun. Gay. Am I right, guys? Am I right, guys? It's not to say that I have anything. I don't find the subject interesting when it's explored, well. But these are not even trying. All right, I see we're nearing in on the hour mark. So, what better way than to push us over that line and conclude episode 3 of Drop or Not 2010 than an anime I finished and thought was pretty darn great. That's right, I finished Shiki. Shiki is a 24 episode show. I think it's technically 22 in the original television run, but then there was an OVA release or something that came with the Blu-rays that added 2 episodes that fit in between episodes. I think it's there's episode 21.5 and there's an episode 20.5, and those sort of fill in some gaps in the story. I imagine certain things would be kind of confusing if you skip those episodes. They are most definitely necessary. You need to watch them to understand what's going on. And the show is something I've heard about before, mainly from Urban the Myth. He's talked about it in a couple videos, and he's mentioned it before as being one of his favorites, and in his opinion, one of the best horror anime that there is. And I mean, from what I've seen, which is not a huge selection, it definitely is up there. I don't know if I can think of a different of another anime that executes horror quite as well. So the basic premise is these creatures called the Shiki, which are essentially vampires. They follow all the same rules as vampires, like they can't enter a home unless they're invited or given permission to enter. They are weak to the sunlight and to religious iconography. They die from a stake through their heart. Other than that, they're immortal, essentially, and they, suck other people's blood. And when someone's blood is sucked, when they die, there's a chance they will come back as a vampire. Not all of them will, but some do. And so across the series, we have it has a gigantic cast of characters, because it's like everyone in this town really is a character, because it takes place in this sort of small town that's distant from society. And so you're basically bouncing between these two different sides, the side of the Shiki and the side of the humans. And for the most part, it's a pretty slow burn until the ending of the series, when the ball drops and everything quite literally goes up in flames. I'll try not to spoil too much, because I do recommend the show and I think it's great. Part of it is it just executes this. It is consistently really entertaining. Like, the cast of characters is very quirky and fun to watch. And the show is just really well paced in a way that makes it so easy to blaze through it. I mean, it's a 2-cour show. Usually I struggle with 2-cour shows. Usually, like, I get to episode 10 or 11 and then I just get stuck. Like, it's just hard to finish it. This show, it was really easy to get through. And in fact, if I wasn't just literally just very busy with work, I would have finished it even earlier than I did. I think. But yeah, it's a whole lot of fun to watch. And even by both being fun, it also does manage to deliver this really effective sort of horrifying atmosphere. It taps into a lot of the quintessential fears we have. On one side, the fear of the unknown and the unexplainable, because the Shiki as creatures are kind of beyond explanation, beyond logic, and this sort of whole angle of the way the town is so isolated, and you can just feel everything slowly fading away, but no one seems to care or understand or recognize what's going on. It's like this feeling of helplessness and apathy and inability to change or do anything. It taps into a lot of those central fears that we have in a really, really effective, well done manner. And also this visually, the visual production is pretty good. There's points where it falters, but for the most part is really consistently entertaining. It constantly is putting new cool visual things in front of your eyes. It's very directed. There's a lot of different stylistic choices in how it chooses to present things from a visual standpoint that I think are quite effective. And it does a lot of, this is something that might bother some people, and I know for me it really depends on how it's handled in the show, whether or not it does, but it definitely pulls the abrupt tone shift, and it's done in a very, very intentional fashion, where you're wallowing in this dark mood, and it's nighttime, and there's a eerie soundtrack piece going, and then just hard cut to daytime, the music completely cuts in the middle of the music, does not really try and transition at all. And it's really feel like it's trying to establish that this harsh contrast, and sort of unsettling nature of how everything ties together. And also, so a lot of the time, these horror shows, when they are violent or gruesome, it's kind of comical. It's just funny. You're like, oh, haha, death. And I think part of the reason it works so well is, first off, it doesn't blow its load in the first episode. Like it takes a while before there's anything like genuinely like dramatically gory unfolding. That's mostly towards the end of the show. But also that the way that it is handled like is with a lot of care, in that it is visualized and presented like from an idea perspective in ways that, like I said, tap into a lot of core fears, and just the idea of things would be very uncomfortable. And it puts just enough that is kind of painful to watch and unsettling, but never is it so over the top with it that it becomes humorous or gratuitous. Like even the points where I would maybe consider calling it gratuitous, it works in the context because it's all about this, like it's this very slow escalation that is sort of a curve that, as it gets closer to the end, slants up really dramatically. And the way it escalates pulls you into it in a way that you're sort of strung along the whole time, and it never really lost me on that front. And I'm trying to think, there's very few series I've seen that have executed extreme violence in a way that is that uncomfortable, like animated specifically. I mean, because a lot of the time, because you're dealing with something that is inherently unreal, it's hard when you trying to depict something really graphic. Our suspension of disbelief can get broken pretty easily, and it's less likely that we're gonna take it as immediately front face, as like at face value, as if we were watching something live action. At least for me, that's I find generally, and some series are definitely not trying to do it more realistically, or more like they want you to sort of enjoy the schlockiness of it, or like the aesthetic aspect to the goriness. But this one definitely wants to hit you hard with it, and it works really effectively. I'm rambling like crazy, but the ideas that the show explores too are pretty interesting, and I'm still thinking about it. And that's part of the reason I finished this show a couple days ago, and it has stuck in my mind. It's still there. I'm still musing on its thematic ideas. A big part of it is community. It explores this whole idea of community in from a point of critique, because a lot of times, and I think this specifically arises perhaps out of what I understand of the like Japanese like social mindset, where it's very much about the group and the whole and everything working, whereas this series explores this idea of more of the individual, and that it is within being trapped in this community that enables us to either it enables us to lose our inhibitions and our empathy on an individual level, such that we can commit really great atrocities through groupthink, or that through our community we lose, we become more accepting of something that we shouldn't be, or we become too averse to change. Like all these different ways that community sort of suppresses the individuality of someone. And it's not to say that it's trying to say that community as a whole is bad, but it's an interesting point of critique, and I thought the way it handled it was pretty well done. I think like the greatest flaw perhaps is the surface level character designs look kind of absurd. However, even then, in the context of the show, while occasionally it does look kind of goofy, and there are definitely points where the show is goofy, where the sound design is a little too over the top, or the direction is too over the top. Like, I'm not saying that it hits it 100%, but it hits it most of the time. And for what it's doing, the extremely ambitious thing it's trying to pull off, that's impressive to me. It executes something that I haven't seen done that well very often, or at all, really. So yeah, I thought it was pretty darn fantastic. Definitely sitting at one of the tops of the year so far. So strongly recommend it. Also, soundtrack is Great, really good. Lots of compelling pieces. I think the soundtrack is another element of why it's so engaging and entertaining on a like second to second basis. So yeah, go watch Shiki. It's an easy binge.